The armies were now all ready to move for the accomplishment of a single object. They were acting as a unit, so far as such a thing was possible over such a vast field. Lee, with the capital of the Confederacy, was the main end to which all were working. Johnston, with Atlanta, was an important obstacle in the way of our accomplishing the result aimed at, and was therefore almost an independent objective. It was of less importance only because the capture of Johnson and his army would not produce so immediate and decisive a result in closing the rebellion as would the possession of Richmond, Lee, and his army. All other troops were employed exclusively in the support of these two movements.
In the first years of the Civil War, both sides engaged in a limited war, with armies focused primarily on fighting each other. Though there had been exceptions, neither side had made a practice of destroying property belonging to non-combatants. But by 1864, General Ulysses S. Grant, along with his General William Tecumseh Sherman, and President Abraham Lincoln, had come to realize that this strategy was simply prolonging the war. To defeat the Confederacy, they must also target the Southern economy, private farms, factories, and the cities of the South. Total war. So in the late spring of 1864, Grant and the Army of the Potomac lay siege to Petersburg, Virginia. Over the next 10 months, the armies there constructed a series of forts and trenches, the likes of which would not be seen again until World War I. Grant's goal was both the actual assault on Petersburg and then on to Richmond, and to capture or destroy General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. At the same time, Grant sent General William Tecumseh Sherman to strike out towards Atlanta and towards General Joseph E. Johnston's Army of Tennessee. He wrote to Sherman,
I propose to move against Johnston's army, to break it up and to get into the interior of the enemy's country as far as you can, inflicting all the damage you can against their war resources.
The capture of either major Confederate city, or the destruction or surrender of either great Confederate army, would be a major turning point in the war. As Grant said, all other actions would be in support of those two major drives. One of those supporting actions was the Valley Campaign, led by Major General David Hunter. To deal with Hunter's advance into the Valley, Robert E. Lee sent General Jubal Early. Early was to drive Hunter out of the Shenandoah Valley and then to move north in the Confederacy's third and final invasion into Union territory. Lee hoped Early could threaten Washington, D.C., forcing Grant to send troops to support the capital. This would weaken Grant's force in Petersburg and give Lee some breathing room. Early was campaigning under the shadow of the late Stonewall Jackson, whose own Valley Campaign in 1862 was already legend. In June, Early defeated Hunter at the Battle of Lynchburg. Hunter's force, now low on supplies, was forced to withdraw to the west. Early pushed through the valley, crossed the Potomac River, into Maryland. Grant sent 2 brigades of the 6th Corps north, under Brigadier General James Ricketts, to help put the capital into that state of preparation. Wallace's 6,000 men needed to delay Early's 14,000 long enough for those reinforcements to arrive. To achieve that delay, they would guard the bridges and fords crossing the Monocacy River. Most of Wallace's soldiers were 100 Days men, who had just enlisted for 100 days for the specific purpose of repelling this invasion. They had not yet been in combat, and they faced veteran troops. But at the last minute, the first contingent of Ricketts' brigades from the 6th Corps reached Baltimore. These veteran units jumped on trains and rushed to join Wallace at the Monocacy. Lieutenant George Davis and 75 of his men from the 10th Vermont Regiment of the 6th Corps were placed with a portion of a Maryland regiment commanded by a Captain Charles Brown. Brown and his 200 men were inexperienced, having just recently entered service. Davis later described his experiences on July 9, 1864.
Our orders were to hold the two bridges across the river at all hazard and prevent the enemy from crossing. Other Union forces were on the south bank of the river. We were the only Union troops on the north side, confronted with General Ramsey's division of Confederate troops. When the enemy advanced about 3:30 a.m. along the pike from Frederick City, Captain Brown allowed them to come within 15 or 20 rods of our position, thinking they were Union troops because dressed in blue clothing which they had recently captured at Martinsburg. I stoutly protested, telling him our friends were behind us. He was convinced when one of his men was killed and several wounded. Then he turned to me in disgust and insisted upon my taking command. I assumed command instantly, brought up my 10th Vermonters to this point, and after a severe fight of about 1 hour, the enemy retired. The third and last attack began about 3:30 p.m. The situation was critical. The enemy came upon us with such overwhelming numbers and desperation that it seemed we should be swept into the river. Nevertheless, we fought for over an hour and kept back a much larger force than ours.
Lieutenant Davis received the Medal of Honor for his defense of the two bridges against repeated assaults of superior numbers, which materially delayed Early's advance on Washington. Early had won the battle, but it cost him a day's march. A delay so crucial that the Battle of Monocacy is called the battle that saved Washington. Early's force reached the outskirts of the capital near Silver Spring, Maryland, around noon on July 11th. He sent out his skirmishers to feel out the fortifications. Those fortifications were strong, but on the 11th, they were undermanned, held by home guards, clerks, and wounded soldiers who were in the capital convalescing. Despite the insufficient lines and the threatening Confederate army, Fort Stevens received a notable visitor that day. President Abraham Lincoln and his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, visited the wounded in the fort's hospital. Jubal Early determined that his men were too weary from their recent battle and march. Add on to that the sweltering heat of that July day and the trenches they faced, and Early decided to wait a day before attacking. That night, the additional reinforcements sent by Grant arrived and added their considerable strength to the city's fortifications. The next day, Early saw that his chance at capturing Washington was gone, though he had been successful in drawing some of Grant's troops away from Petersburg and Richmond. Union and Confederate troops skirmished during the day as Early prepared to leave. Though the actual battle was small, it almost cost the Union dearly. President Lincoln, still at the fort to observe the attack, came under fire from sharpshooters. A surgeon near Lincoln was shot by a marksman. The president himself was ordered to take cover, reportedly with a brusque, "Get down, you fool!" The Union commanders sent a few veteran brigades out of the fort to push the Confederates back beyond the fortifications. That night, under cover of darkness, Early slipped away.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.